On Contact with Chris Hedges. Welcome to On Contact. I'm Chris Hedges. Today we sit down with Seattle Socialist City Councilwoman Kshama Sawant.
Let's begin the project of building an independent party for the 99%. The two corporate party stranglehold has been a failed strategy for us. We need our own party.
On Contact, neoliberalism is patriotism. Truth is not. Socialism is counterweight class war. Corporate coup d'etat, utopian ideology of neoliberalism revolts unmasked. On Contact with Chris Hedges. The artifice of corporate totalitarianism has been exposed. The citizens, disgusted by the lies and manipulation, have turned on the political establishment. But the game is not over. Corporate power has within its arsenal potent forms of control. It will use them. As the pretense of democracy is unmasked, the naked fist of state repression takes its place. This moment in American history is what Antonio Gramsci called the interregnum, the period when a discredited regime is collapsing but a new one has yet to take its place. There is no guarantee that what comes next will be better. But this space, which will close soon, offers citizens the final chance to embrace a new vision and a new direction. This vision will only be obtained through a radical break with corporate capitalism, indeed its overthrow, and sustained mass acts of civil mobilization and civil disobedience across the country. A failure to act means an inevitable slide into despotism. Let's look at the obstacles that are placed before movements that attempt to challenge established structures, in particular, what is done to block third parties and their candidates from competing in elections in the United States. Anya Parampil has more.
It is the question of the day on the campaign trail.
We will see what Hillary Clinton and the Clinton campaign has ready.
It's dirty, but it's very Trumpian.
Donald Trump got his Make America Great Again hat handed to him last night.
Watching the mainstream media, one thing is clear, or at least two things: the Democrats and the Republicans. Every election cycle, the two parties duke it out until one strong man or woman prevails. It's a drama so intense it makes all of us feel like we have a choice. However, most of us don't even realize how many choices we have. Third parties. The term is almost misleading because there are so many of them, from the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, the Constitution Party, to the Party for Socialism and Liberation, just to name a few. According to the Federal Election Commission, 1,760 people have filed a statement of candidacy to run for president in 2016, from all sorts of parties. Third parties offer a wide variety of political flavors and ideologies. However, they face massive hurdles just to be included on the national stage. For example, to file that statement of candidacy, you have to have spent $5,000 on your campaign. Another main issue is ballot access. Every state has its own set of requirements to get a candidate on the ballot, which can include steep fees and/or a required amount of registered voters' signatures to legitimize the candidate. Just to get on the ballot in all 50 states, it's estimated by Ballotpedia that an independent presidential candidate would have to get about 880,000 signatures at the cost of $1.05 to $6.44 a signature, meaning it could cost $5.5 million just to be a viable national candidate. Plus, if nobody knows who you are, it's pretty hard to get those signatures, meaning the highest hurdle for independent presidential candidates might be getting into the debates. Presidential debates are put on by a private firm, the Commission for Presidential Debates, which sounds like a nice, nonpartisan organization, right? Right, because it is nonpartisan. It's owned by the two parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. Their rules require a candidate to get 15% of the vote in at least 5 national polls before being included, which again is really hard to do if you're not one of the main two parties, if the media doesn't cover you, and if nobody knows who you are. But this year might be different, as the presumed nominee and frontrunner for the two major political parties, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, are extremely unpopular. According to a joint NBC-Wall Street Journal poll, 54% of Americans view Hillary Clinton with a negative or somewhat negative opinion. For Donald Trump, that number is 58. With Americans so unsatisfied, time might be ripe for a fresh candidate from a fresh party.
Kshama Sawant is perhaps the most dangerous woman in America. She is the only socialist on the Seattle City Council. She was elected in January of 2014 and re-elected despite being targeted by the Chamber of Commerce and the State Democratic Party in 2016. She has helped push through a gradual raising of the minimum wage to $15 an hour in Seattle. For this and other radical reforms, she has become the bête noire of the establishment. So let's open first by talking about this primary season. What's happened, in particular in the Democratic Party? We've seen two insurgencies. I think we've seen a very naive Bernie Sanders believe that he could harness a clear popular will to take the nomination. But he, I think, did not count on the extent to which the Clinton machine and the Democratic Party establishment would play dirty. For instance, although taxpayers pay for the primaries, the Democratic Party controls them. It's locked out independents. Most of Bernie's base are independents. That cycle where he won Rhode Island was the only state that permitted independents to vote in the primary. We have the whole issue of superdelegates. We have caucuses such as Nevada, which are rigged by the Clinton machine against Sanders. If you can recap what happened in Nevada.
Yeah, I mean, in Nevada, what happened was it was just an example of what is happening throughout the Democratic Party primaries, which is that there is a desire on the part of the whole base of the Democrats in order to push forward Sanders' message, and that is being blocked at every step of the way. And in Nevada, what happened was just a more overt version of what's been happening, where the Sanders people were sort of shut out, and they said, they demanded a voice, and the Clinton Democrats reacted in a very hierarchical kind of way. And the reason they're doing that is because they are trying to shut down the message of the political revolution itself. And I think that what happened in Nevada was just yet another step of what happened in New York State. If you look at the massive disenfranchisement that happened of Democratic primary voters.
Even here in New York City, in Brooklyn.
Even here in New York City, right here, yes. Right here in New York City, in Brooklyn, that was one of the most glaring examples of what's happened. And I think all of those are really revealing of the state of affairs of American politics. And Bernie running as an open socialist, but within the Democratic Party, I think there are two features that emerge primarily. One is the fact that the word socialist was not a barrier. Tens of millions of people have rallied around, really enthusiastically, young people getting politicized for the first time around Bernie's message of a political revolution against the billionaire class. That's what for the first lesson. Lesson number one, America wants to move left, not right.
Right.
But the second lesson is that you cannot move leftward and really provide an alternative to corporate politics from within the Democratic Party. That's also been a lesson, I think, for a lot of people who put their hopes in the Bernie campaign and are recognizing that at every step of the way, the Democratic Party is not only not trying to provide a fair playing field, they're actually going to great lengths to rig the process, to stymie the process, so that the voice of working people is not reflected in the results of the primary. And I think that when people are afraid of Trump, they should recognize that Trump's ascendancy is just another reflection of the polarization in society, not between left-wing working Americans and right-wing working Americans. The real polarization is between working people as a whole who have experienced stagnant living standards and the top 1%. That's the deep polarization in society.
And yet it's being expressed on the Republican side by a very frightening kind of proto-fascism.
It is. Trump's agenda is really frightening, and I think any rational person is going to be terrified by this idea of bigotry, misogyny, sexism, Islamophobia, and anti-immigrant hysteria. And I think it's absolutely correct that we should worry about where this is headed. But I think the only way we can analyze this and understand what is the solution, I mean, what is the way out of a rightward shift, we have to understand that Trump is not a phenomenon by himself. Trump didn't just happen overnight. The Trump phenomenon is the product of decades of rightward shift.
Responding to a phenomenon.
He is. I mean, he is. To be honest, he's taking very cynical and despicable advantage of an existing situation that he's a part of, but that situation, predates him, and it's happened over decades of a rightward shift by the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and that's why the only way to provide an alternative to the right is to build on the left.
And I think you were making the point before we went on air that we are now about to enter an election season with, two of the most unpopular nominees in years.
Absolutely. This is in some ways, I mean, if you just step back and if you watch it from, I have a bird's eye view, it really seems like a very strange kind of political circus. The least popular presidential candidate in the last 10 presidential cycles running, that is Trump, running against the second least popular presidential candidate from a major party. I think that really shows you how neither Trump nor Clinton, even though there are clear differences between them, represent the needs of ordinary working people. And the most important point being that Trump would not have found an echo had there been a real leftward surge, starting with the economic recession and the bailouts. I mean, that's the missing piece, the left.
Right. I mean, to what extent do you think the Democratic Party is playing a dangerous game by throwing up a candidate, Clinton, who epitomizes everything, both sides of the political spectrum have risen up against?
Absolutely. I think that's a very important question. I mean, when people think of Trump, people are correctly terrified. I am horrified. It's stomach-turning, his agenda. But it would be incorrect to think that the vast majority of people who support him, which, by the way, are a fraction of what support Sanders has, let's keep that in perspective. Right. But even if you look at the whole base that Trump has, only a very small minority, I would say, I mean, I don't have statistics, but I would say just my assessment and instinct of American consciousness is that only a very small fringe of that is truly based in fascism and really, really terrifying ideas. For the most part, it's regular working people who are supporting him, not for the right reason. I mean, he's not going to deliver them out of their anger against corporate politics, but it is the anger against corporate politics that is making them support him. So it really is, as you correctly pointed out, Chris, it's sort of circular logic, for the Democratic Party to say, well, if people are angry, they're not saying this, I'm saying this, people are angry against corporate politics, that's why they're going towards Trump. So the Democratic Party's solution to that is to present the very epitome of that corporate establishment as an alternative to people who are disenchanted by corporate politics. It's all mixed.
And we're going to stop there for a break. Join me when we come back for our conversation with Kshama Sawant.
Earlier today, President Obama
Senate Republicans previously stated that the component responsible for poisoning people in Flint.
There was always hope.
That's what goes on with our politicians. What are women supposed to do? Here's something else we know.
Between the U.S.
Lawyers
and Cuba.
at the ACLU have already some degree of loss in business.
It's a huge difference.
Following the announcement, oil prices.
Nobody's talking about this story because it's garbage.
Real, genuine, and significant change.
I'm Tom Harpin, and I'll give you what the mainstream media can't, the big picture. We'll go deeper, investigate, and debate, all so you can get the big picture.
For decades, the American middle class has been railroaded by Washington politics. Big money corporate interest has drowned out a lot of voices. That's how it is in the news culture in this country now. That's where I come in. I'm Ed Schultz. I do the news on RT America. I'll make sure you don't get railroaded and you'll get the straight talk and the straight news. Question more.
What politicians do is something we don't do. They put themselves on the line and they get accepted or rejected. So when you want to be president, what would you want to be? What would someone want to be president? What's it like to be president? What's it like when the phone rings at 3 in the morning? Can't be a good call. I'm interested always in the whys and the hows.
And Q Larry.
Question more.
On Contact with Chris Hedges. Welcome back to On Contact and my conversation with Kshama Sawant. So in the first part of the interview, we laid out a little bit of the role of the Democratic Party in thwarting the desires of even the Democratic base. And so I want to focus a little bit on how do we respond. Given the fact that we have this two-party duopoly, each of which have been captured by corporate power, how are we going to step back and restore our democratic system?
Right, and in fact, if we are talking about democracy, then I think it's an incomplete and really inadequate analysis unless we talk about independent left politics, because as you said, Chris, I mean, both parties have been captured by Wall Street interests, by billionaire interests, and it's big oil and big coal and other Walmart lobbyists that decide political outcomes. And millions of people are fed up with this, tens of millions of people, and I mean, young people are really angry and wanting a fight back. But it is never going to happen as long as we remain within the Democratic and Republican Party stranglehold. And I think this is the most important question really that's on people's minds that we need to really grapple with, because people feel, people often tell me, Kshama, I agree with you that we need independent politics, but it's too daunting this year, and I'm afraid that if I start talking about independent politics, I will allow Trump to be elected, and this year I feel like I need to support Hillary, and then later we will talk about...
This is the argument every year.
That's the argument every year, and in fact, as you were saying a little while ago when you and I were talking, in that kind of logic where we think of politics simply as locked into a presidential election year is like a kiss of death, because the logic of accepting a Clinton as an alternative to Trump, that logic runs ad nauseum. There's never going to be a good year to provide a real left alternative.
Well, and the issue is that argument of the least worst. Every year it gets worse.
Every year it gets worse, and that you hit the nail on the head, Chris. That is the problem. If it were true, hypothetically, if it were true that Trump was just egregiously bad, it was just this year and overall things were okay, then there would be some sense in arguing that let's support Hillary even if we have differences. But that is not the point. The point is that the Trump phenomenon is a result of a rightward shift by the Democrats in response to the Republicans and in response to their own corporate, their corporate masters. And really, if we are worried about Trump, then we should worry even more about what is going to happen in terms of an ongoing base for a right ideology if we don't build an alternative to the Clintons as well.
Right, because you get rid of Trump. But if you don't get rid of this process of neoliberalism, you'll cough up something even more vile than Trump.
Something even more vile is bound to come up. It's guaranteed unless we build the left. So, my response to often people feeling demoralized is that, look, what we should really be watching out for is the fact that we are guaranteed to get nothing better and get something worse if we continue in this failed strategy, and the other strategy will be hard, but it has a hope. We know that history has shown that when we build independent left politics, it actually puts a lot of pressure on the establishment.
Well, and I think you've often said that we, by being trapped within this election cycle, we disempower ourselves. We have to think, look, this isn't about achieving power now, it's about achieving power 10 years from now. In the same way that Syriza, 10 years before it took power, was polling at about 4%.
It's incredible. If you're looking at all around Europe, as you said, just millions of working people have completely, roundly rejected establishment parties, and that process is starting to unfold in the United States as well. It's especially evident in the complete chaos of the Republican Party, but you can see what's happening within the Democratic Party as well. People are starting to understand that the Democratic Party establishment is not on our side. And here's the thing, right? If the Democratic Party's priority was to defeat Trump's agenda, then why haven't they done everything in their power to promote Sanders, who could deliver?
Who actually polls far ahead of, in terms of beating Trump.
So in other words, this is what I would say, my assessment of the Democratic Party establishment is that their priority to defeat the working class agenda and stem this tide is far greater than defeating the right. And that's the choice we would be accepting if we were to get behind Hillary. That is why through Movement for Bernie, what I've been saying is that we need to urge Bernie to run independent, but even if he doesn't, we have to keep building our movement. And in order to build our movement, we have to build left alternatives, and supporting Hillary is fundamentally antagonistic to that.
Well, I think you've made a call to Bernie Sanders supporters that if Sanders is not willing to step outside of the confines of the Democratic Party and build an independent movement, his supporters have to do it for him.
We absolutely, people on the ground, we have to remember this is not about Bernie. It's about our desire to fight for social change, to stem the tide of the seemingly inexorable tide of income and racial inequality. We want to fight against student debt, police brutality, for single-payer healthcare, for $15 an hour. We have to build mass movements on the streets. We can't wait for the elite to help us, because we know they have not only not helped us, they have been the reason for the standards of living and the decline that we face. But these mass movements have to also build political power. Right. We need our own representatives. We would not have 115 in Seattle had I not had a seat on the Seattle City Council as a socialist in defiance of the Democratic establishment. That's the sort of politics we need.
Let's talk a little bit about what the elites will do when threatened. We've seen how nasty they've been to the Sanders campaign. We saw what they did to Ralph Nader, who in 2000 built a legitimate, quite powerful grassroots movement. The Democratic Party in particular carried out vicious character assassination campaigns against him, in addition to challenging all his voting lists to run up hundreds of thousands of dollars of legal fees. There's no question that if these people feel threatened, if we step outside that system, we are going to have to deal with very severe ramifications.
There will be ramification, and in fact, in addition to what you said, I would also add everything that's happened throughout history. Every time there has been a resistance, a challenge to the status quo of the elite, we will face repercussions. But I think that is it's worth fighting for. This a vision of a just society is worth fighting for, and that is why you've seen throughout the ages, young people especially showing tremendous courage. The workers who walked out of their jobs demanding $15 an hour and the right to unionize. So, I think the first set of workers who did that was right here in Manhattan, where we are, fast food workers. I think that takes tremendous courage, and people throughout history will show that tremendous courage. It's our job to build on that courage and really have some organized efforts to show for. That is why I am not a free-floating activist. I'm a member of Socialist Alternative, because I recognize that having an organization is what matters. Wall Street has 2 organizations for itself. It's time we had one of our own.
And so where do you see us heading? We're flirting with another financial crisis. Every month now, this year has been hotter than the last. The collapse of the ecosystem is accelerating at a pace that even climate scientists did not predict. We're at a very dangerous moment, and the left is largely been disempowered. Labor unions are broken. The press is an echo chamber for the elites. Those even nonviolent movements, Occupy, Black Lives Matter, that step out into the streets face unbelievable forms of militarized police violence. And of course, in marginal communities, unarmed citizens are being gunned down by police who have, total impunity. How are these, how are all of these things going to converge, and what are they going to mean for us politically? We should also acknowledge that we live in the most sophisticated security and surveillance state in human history, and I covered the Stasi state in East Germany.
That's right, and your coverage of the U.S. surveillance state has been incredible. It really shows how, as you were saying, it shows the sophistication of their apparatus for repression. And it also, throughout history, we've seen their willingness to use. I mean, they may use it strategically, but they will not hesitate to use it if they feel it's necessary. And that is why the question to us is, how do we combat that? We obviously are not going to be able to combat that with our own surveillance apparatus, and that's not the way to go. The real power we have that can be more threatening to them than their repressive apparatus can be to us is political power. And so ultimately, unless we build our political organizations, build our political analysis, and develop ourselves as political fighters, we have no hope. And that is why you can see when there have been successful uprisings, when there have been successful movements, those victories were won not by having some sort of militaristic war with the establishment. They were won.
You can't win those wars.
You can't win those wars. The wars we can win are the wars, which I call political wars, where we bring our might out on the streets, where our working people...
Through nonviolence.
Through nonviolence, absolutely. Nonviolent civil disobedience has been a very, very powerful tool. But the main ingredient that makes it powerful is if we are able to build solidarity among working people, and if we are able to get organized. And I think I just wanted to add one more thing. You mentioned the labor movement. The labor movement is has been on the decline, but organized workers in the workplace still remains. I mean, the idea of workers getting organized is still the fundamentally most powerful way for people to fight back, and we need that fight back to start happening.
What would you tell, I have 1 minute left, supporters of Bernie Sanders? What would you advise them to do?
For supporters of Bernie Sanders, I appeal to you, first of all, go to movementforbernie.org and sign our petition for him to run as an independent. And I want to remind you, that is not because I think he's going to run as an independent at this moment. He may, but we should put pressure on him. But it's also to begin building our political revolution. My message would be, let's begin the project of building an independent party for the 99%. The two corporate party stranglehold has been a failed strategy for us. We need our own party.
Thank you for joining us. That was Kshama Sawant. The disintegration of the ruling political parties, along with the discrediting of the established political and economic elites, presages radical change. This change may come from the right. It may result in a frightening proto-fascism. We are seeing the rise of these forces centered around white nativism and racism within the Republican Party. If it is to come from the left, it must be pushed forward by dogged activists and citizens who are willing to accept that stepping outside the system, and in particular the Democratic Party, will mean surrendering all hope of power for perhaps a decade. To continue to engage in establishment politics will further empower corporate capitalism and extinguish what remains of our democracy. Thank you for watching. You can find us on rt.com/oncontact. See you next week.